So now that the second season of Star Trek Lower Decks is over, I suppose I should share my thoughts on it in a video, because sharing my thoughts about Star Trek in videos is kind of my job. Granted, I work for myself, so I guess I don't have to make this video, but then again, have you met my boss? He's an asshole. Unlike the previous reviews I've done of the current generation of Star Trek shows, I'm not going to break this review down episode by episode. I'll talk about a few particular moments that stood out for me from throughout the season, but my feelings about this season of Lower Decks are fairly generalized, so instead of going episode by episode, I'm just going to offer some overall thoughts on what I thought of the second season of Lower Decks and where I think it stands at this point. However, I will still occasionally be getting into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen Season 2 of Lower Decks yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, maybe skip this video for now. Broadly speaking, my take on the second season is that it was obviously made by people who love this particular show and who love Star Trek in general. When I see my fellow Trekkies tweeting their appreciation or making videos with really positive reviews or reactions, they nearly always describe it as a love letter to Star Trek, and it definitely is. As was the case in the first season, the show is densely packed with Star Trek-related references and Easter eggs, some of which are so obscure that only the most diehard and observant nerds would even notice them. For example, take this character from Episode 8, I Excretus. She's a Pandronian, a species that can detach parts of their bodies. Pandronians were first and last seen in the Star Trek The Animated Series episode Bem, so this is already a pretty deep pull, but as Jorg Hillebrand of the Trek website Ex Astra Scientia points out, Yem, the Lower Decks character, even has the same randomly occurring inconsistency in her character design as Bem, appearing to have 4 fingers per hand in some shots and 5 fingers per hand in others. That is attention to detail, and congratulations to whichever massive Star Trek nerds on the Lower Decks team came up with that and got it on screen. That is genuinely impressive. I only wish they worked that hard on their jokes. Because after 2 seasons, my biggest problem with Lower Decks continues to be that it's just not that funny. In this season, there were moments that made me smile, moments that made me chuckle, moments that made me think, oh, that's clever. The show is likable, watchable, but it seems far more interested in being fun than in being funny. And its primary mission isn't comedy or storytelling, but fan service. There was exactly one gag this entire second season that made me laugh out loud, and it's this one from the second episode, Kayshawn His Eyes Open, where the Lower Deckers are aboard the ship of a famous galactic collector a la Kivas Fajo from TNG's episode The Most Toys, and they discover the remains of Spock's gigantic clone from Star Trek The Animated Series, suspended from the ceiling like a dinosaur skeleton, still clad in his tattered Starfleet uniform. That bit had me laughing for like 5 minutes. I shit you not. It's such a dark and unexpected joke. It's probably the funniest gag in the entire series so far. And yet, even that is a fan service joke. To someone who hasn't seen The Infinite Vulcan, it probably just seems like a random shot of a big skeleton. It's funny to me because I get the reference. I grasp the significance. And look, lots of jokes work like that. Hell, any joke, no matter how broad or narrow its frame of reference, only works if you get it. But most of the gags on Lower Decks are of this kind, and none of the rest of them are anywhere near as funny as this one. Far too often, the show plays like the writers were willing to settle for a reference instead of writing a joke. Maybe by the time they got done researching all the Easter eggs, they were too tired to write jokes. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't accuse the show of lazy writing. Every script is obviously the product of a lot of hard work. But maybe misdirected effort? If they put this much work into crafting clever original gags that didn't lean so heavily on Easter eggs and callbacks to other Star Trek shows, it would undoubtedly be a better show. I'm not trying to say they failed to come up with anything like that this year. I still say the best bit the show has done so far is the one from the series premiere, Second Contact, where Rutherford is going on a date while a crisis engulfs the ship in the background. But there was a bit from this season that comes closer than anything else has yet. It's Boimler's story from episode 8 of season 2, the aforementioned I Excretus. The premise of the episode has the crew being tested on their competence by running drills in miniature holodecks. It's mostly an excuse to allow the creators of the show to be even more self-indulgent than usual with the references and Easter eggs, with several of the scenarios faced by the characters being based directly on episodes of previous Star Trek series. Some of these are more clever than others. Junior Medical Officer Tendi fails her test when she keeps trying and failing to assist an injured Klingon in attaining an honorable death, which is a funny idea. On the other hand, Mariner's final test drops her into a scenario inspired by The Naked Time, where she's surrounded by holograms of her intoxicated crewmates having a massive orgy in the mess hall. It's not very funny or inventive. Mariner sees her friends naked and having sex with each other and freaks out isn't that difficult of a bit to come up with, and it doesn't go anywhere beyond the obvious. Though Mariner's naked time simulation is the bit from this episode that got the most attention because of this brief, censored shot of hologram Boimler showing off the hole where food comes out, which has now been on screen in this video for much longer than it is in the actual episode. It sparked controversy on Trek Twitter for a few days after the episode dropped because some prudes in the fan base flipped out about it, and to those fans who were upset by knowing Boimler's bits and pieces are right behind that black bar, let me make this suggestion. Maybe grow up. For as long as Star Trek has been unapologetically progressive, in other words, for as long as it has existed, it has also been as shamelessly horny as it can get away with. Get over it. Anyway, the best bit in the episode involves the fully clothed, genuine Boimler, whose holodeck test requires him to escape a Borg cube. He does, passing the test. However, he frowns at his final score of 79% and takes the test again, determined to do better. For the rest of the episode, we occasionally cut back to Boimler as he completes a series of runs through the Borg cube, each more complicated and challenging than the last, nudging that score up a few percentage points each time. Boimler finally scores a perfect 100% after not only surviving the Borg cube, but rescuing a batch of Borg babies, de-assimilating the Borg crew, and defeating the Borg Queen in a game of chess, while also teaching her the value of empathy. But before he can end the simulation and get credit for his perfect score, Mariner and Captain Freeman contact him and tell him to keep going for reasons having to do with the plot of the episode. So he does, as long as he can, his score dropping the entire time, until finally he is assimilated, becoming the titular Excretus of Borg, before he is finally allowed to leave the mini holodeck with the decidedly less impressive final score of 8%. It's a really solid bit. Some of it, particularly Boimler's encounter with the Borg Queen, is directly lifted from other Trek shows, which brings it down a notch, but overall, it feels a lot more original than, say, Mariner's simulations. And most importantly, the humor is rooted in Boimler's character, not the shallow, inelegant fan service to which the show resorts far too often. Boimler is a perfectionist and a brown-noser who wants to impress the senior officers. It makes sense that he wouldn't be satisfied with being one of the few crew members to pass his test, that he would keep going back until he got the highest possible score. But because Boimler is also the guy who tries really hard but never winds up getting everything he wants, it also works when he's forced to trash his selfish triumph for the good of his friends. It's a funny concept, it's executed in a way that is satisfying in terms of comedy and character, and it's the best example this season of Lower Decks being the kind of show I wish it was a lot more often. Speaking of the show I wish it was, let me talk for a minute about the season finale, which I think is easily the best overall episode Lower Decks produced this year. It's called First Contact. The premise has the Cerritos assigned to assist another ship in a first contact mission. That other ship is the USS Archimedes, commanded by Captain Sonia Gomez. Yes, that Sonia Gomez, who last appeared in the Star Trek The Next Generation episodes Q, Who, and Samaritan Snare way back in that show's second season. She's the only thing about the episode that really annoyed me. Nothing against the character or Licia Naff, the actor who played Gomez during her 2 TNG appearances and who returns to voice her here. They're both fine. But her presence here is a prolonged act of arcane fan service, the sort of, I wonder what so-and-so is up to these days, box checking that apparently is the sort of thing a lot of my fellow Trekkies are just dying to see from the new shows, but which I could honestly do completely without. And I know if I don't acknowledge this, somebody will leave a comment pointing out that I didn't have a problem with Riker and Troy showing up in the first season of Star Trek Picard, so why should I have a problem with Gomez showing up here? There are 2 important differences from where I stand. First, Riker and Troy were important characters. Gomez wasn't. Second, Riker and Troy were integral to the story of their episode. They weren't just there to wave and say hi and do callbacks to some of their old episodes to give fans a nostalgia fix. That's not to say Riker and Troy's appearance on Picard was completely free of fan service. The contrivance of their house having shields, just so Riker could throw us a "shields up, red alert" comes to mind on that score, but in general, Riker and Troy being present is justified by the story. Not the case for Captain Sonia Gomez. Her appearance feels more like an didn't expect to see her, did ya situation, with a cloying callback to that time she spilled hot chocolate on Captain Picard, thrown in for good measure. I do not like. But look at me spending all that time talking about the big thing in the episode that didn't work for me. Enough of that, because there was plenty about this last episode of Season 2 that did work for me. The crisis of the episode involves the Archimedes being disabled on the other side of a dense field of magnetic planetary debris. As the Archimedes falls helplessly toward a nearby planet and certain doom, the crew of the Cerritos scrambles to figure out a way to get through the debris field in time to make the save. Their solution, suggested by Rutherford, who, after 2 seasons, is still my favorite character, I think, is to remove the metallic outer hull of the Cerritos, thereby allowing the ship to move through the debris field without being affected by the intense magnetism. It's a really clever new variation on the old, we have to change something about the ship to solve the problem trope that Star Trek has used over and over again. The visual of the Cerritos without its outer hull is something we've never seen from a Star Trek ship before, which is cool, and it was foreshadowed earlier in the season in Episode 5 and Embarrassment of Duplers, where we see Rutherford and Tendi building a model of the Cerritos that includes a removable outer hull. The best payoffs are the ones you didn't even know had been set up, and this is a fine example of that very thing. I'll say it again, the show is definitely not lazily written. The crisis and the solution to the crisis combine into a smart, fresh spin on a well-worn franchise trope, classic Star Trek, and on top of that, there are a couple of funny moments. I don't think anything that actually made me laugh out loud, but I came close, maybe twice, and I'm pretty sure both times were in Cetacean Ops. And credit where credit is due, we've introduced Cetacean Ops as a setting on the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek comedy podcast I do alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, links in the description. Dana's character works in the Enterprise D's Cetacean Ops section. We've done horny dolphin jokes, and I gotta admit, with some envy and admiration, that the horny dolphin jokes on Lower Decks were better. Well, horny beluga whale jokes, technically. The 2 cetacean officers we meet in First Contact, named Matt and Kimolu, are very into Rutherford, and their cheerfully aggressive flirting and repeated invitations to him to get out of his uniform and into the pool are the comic highlight of the episode for me. So, First Contact wasn't the funniest episode of the season. I'm not sure what the funniest episode was, to be honest, because the humor was so uneven. But overall, it was the best episode of the season, and honestly one of the best episodes of the whole series to this point. There were other episodes this season that had some clever bits, and there were some promising ideas that could have gone somewhere interesting or funny or both, but weren't adequately explored. Probably the best example is the inexplicable return of Lieutenant Shax in the episode We'll Always Have Tom Paris. Shax was killed saving the life of Rutherford in the previous season finale. Now he's just back, alive and well, and nobody except Rutherford seems to think it's a big deal. As Boimler explains, sometimes bridge officers return from the dead. It's just a thing that happens. The back from the dead trope is an ideal target for comedy, especially when approached from the perspective of the lower deckers, to whom the sudden return to life of a dead senior officer would be even more bewildering than it would be to people who actually have some idea how it happened. It's a great idea, one of the best ideas in the show this season. Unfortunately, the writers can't really think of anywhere to go with it, and it ends with a limp payoff that wouldn't feel out of place at the end of an SNL sketch. Another solid idea that never really goes anywhere comes in the season's second-to-last episode, Wej Duj, which is Klingon for 3 ships. The premise is that while the crew of the Cerritos indulges in some R&R during a long-distance warp trip, we drop in on the junior officers of a Klingon ship and a Vulcan ship. Again, clever starting point. Again, it goes nowhere. I know a lot of fans really liked the Vulcan section of this episode, but honestly, it did nothing for me. I found it to be very one-note. Oh, they're being snarky, but since they're Vulcans, the snark is really calm and understated. I get it, very amusing. The Klingon section is a rehash, albeit a lampshaded one, of the renegade Klingon does something crazy to try and return glory to the Empire plot we've seen a time or two before, and the section set aboard the Cerritos is just a clothesline on which the writers can hang a bunch of random references to other Star Trek shows as if the series needed another one of those. Hey, look! Boimler's wearing rocket boots and a Go Climb a Rock shirt. Get it? Hey, look! They run a Hawaii program on the holodeck that looks just like the resort program they had on Voyager. Remember that? See all the costumes? I bet they look familiar. Who are these people and why would any of them be wearing these exact outfits? That doesn't matter. The point is, you recognize them, and a faint nod of recognition is just as good as a laugh. Actually, a faint nod of recognition is apparently better than a laugh, because that's usually the one Lower Decks goes for. Anyway, you get the idea. I don't want to get too negative, because even though I do think, probably vainly, that my criticisms are mostly thoughtful and constructive, there's more than enough negativity in Trek fandom already, especially toward the current crop of shows. And besides, despite my many, many problems with it, I don't think Lower Decks is a bad show. I'd probably enjoy it a lot more if I didn't know so much about Star Trek, because then most of the Easter eggs would just whiz right by, and I wouldn't even notice them to be annoyed by them. Lower Decks is beautifully drawn and animated. It has a talented and enthusiastic cast of actors who give their all in every performance, and it's written and produced by people who obviously know and love Star Trek and put a ton of work into everything they do. It's not a bad show. It's just not for me. I didn't feel that way at the end of season 1, but I definitely feel that way now. Last year, I said the show rarely made me laugh, but it did make me smile, and that was enough to keep me coming back and to leave me looking forward to the next season. This year, I can't honestly say that. I'm not dreading season 3 or anything, but I am indifferent. I'm not saying I'm going to stop watching the show, but I have thought about it, and I wouldn't miss it. So I hope this doesn't rain on anyone's parade. If you love Lower Decks, I hope you continue to love it. I hope it keeps making you happy and that it always leaves you wanting more. It doesn't do that for me, but that's okay. I'm curious about Star Trek Prodigy, which debuts this week, and I'm looking forward to Season 4 of Star Trek Discovery with great excitement, and there's also Season 2 of Star Trek Picard, and the first season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds still on the horizon, plus all the old stuff, so there's plenty of Star Trek for everybody. Lower Decks is not my Star Trek. Not usually anyway, but if it's yours, I hope it continues to bring you all the joy you can take from it. I won't hold it against you, I promise. That's it, everybody. As always, please agree or disagree in the comments. Don't forget to check out our unofficial Star Trek comedy podcast, The Ensign's Log, linked in the description. And don't forget, if you like what I do here on YouTube, I need your help so I can keep doing it. If you can afford it and you think I'm worth it, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, or become a channel member by clicking the join button and become a supporter of this channel and gain access to some cool extra benefits for as little as $1 a month. Thanks for all your support in whatever form it takes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.